Baba Yaga.
After the bittersweet ending of John Wick Chapter 4, where the titular protagonist is seemingly dead after taking down his enemy, if someone told me that I would get to see John Wick, Winston, and Charon in action one more time, I would have taken a journey through the deserts of Morocco like John Wick did to find the Elder. As it turns out, I don't have to take all that trouble because the newly released movie Ballerina fulfills the dream of every John Wick fan. The story, however, is not centered around the Baba Yaga of the assassin world, and we have a new protagonist in the mix of things, Eve Macaro, the ballerina assassin. In this video, I'll break down the movie and elaborate on the cliffhanger climax, and I have to warn you about a few major spoilers along the way. So let's find out if the new movie really means business, or if it's just a cash grab attempt to milk the John Wick fame. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
I know you. I know your pain.
Who is Eve Macaro and how does she connect to the John Wick universe? For those who don't know, from the world of John Wick, Ballerina is set between the events of John Wick Chapter 3 and John Wick Chapter 4. The story focuses on a student of the Roma Rusca, Eve Macaro, who's first seen in training as she prepares for the journey ahead. She's training as the ballerina assassin, something that we all saw a glimpse of during the third John Wick movie. Because of the timeline, it's easy for the movie to bring in John Wick and Charon. If you remember the fate of Charon in John Wick Chapter 4, he was shot dead to punish Winston for his disobedience. And unfortunately, the actor playing the role, Lance Reddick, also passed away recently. It does bring a bittersweet moment as you get to see him on screen for the last time, because Ballerina was filmed before his death. As for John Wick, who is apparently dead at the end of John Wick Chapter 4, he's alive and kicking because the events of this movie precede the fourth, and we have one hell of a cameo that's worth heading to the theaters for.
What a pleasure to see you again.
What is the backstory of Eve Macaro, and why is she out for revenge? It wouldn't be a fitting addition to the John Wick franchise without a fitting revenge story arc, would it? Ballerina does not disappoint, and the movie is essentially a revenge story, as Eve Macaro sets out to deliver her violent brand of justice once her training is just about complete. We've seen Eve briefly during the events of John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum, where she featured in the first act, even though the dancer assassin was played by a different actor back then. In fact, some parts of the narrative coincide with Parabellum, such as the moment when Eve witnesses John attempting to avoid the High Table when he comes back to the organization that raised and trained him, Rusca Roma. She even speaks briefly with John before he heads out for his meeting with Sofia. The movie does take its sweet time to get going, but you also get a good understanding of the origin of Eve Macaro in what might seem as a lengthy prologue. It turns out that Eve's mother was a member of the cult before she married Javier, even though he was an outsider. This mysterious organization is probably as ancient as the High Table, or probably linked with it, and the members of this organization have an X branded on their wrists. They both got accepted into the violent ways of the cult, and the couple had two daughters, Lena and Eve. With time, Javier became concerned about the ways of the cult, and he attempted to escape while taking Eve along with him. He thought that his elder daughter Lena was far too deeply indoctrinated and couldn't be removed from the cult, but he wanted a different life for his younger daughter Eve. The first sequence of the movie reveals that Javier was killed off as he attempted to rescue Eve from the grasp of the cult. Winston, the iconic savior and Man Friday of the franchise, came to her rescue and brought her to the Rusca Roma, where she spent her years in training to become a skilled assassin. The fate of her mother is never revealed explicitly, but at one point, the Chancellor, who serves as a leading figure of the cult and the primary antagonist of the movie, suggests that Eve's mother paid the price for the desertion of her husband. Nevertheless, Eve starts training and she trains hard. The movie captures her journey as she goes from a pretty little girl to a vicious fighter who can take down hordes of men physically stronger than her. She becomes a part of the group of hitmen known as Kikimora. And just like John Wick's title of Baba Yaga, Kikimora is inspired by an entity from Slavic folklore that is formidable and dangerous. Trouble starts brewing when she decides to head out on her own with revenge on her mind. She wants the killers of her father and everyone connected with them dead, and she now has the skills to avenge the biggest trauma of her childhood.
This is your fate.
How does the showdown between Eve and the Chancellor play out? Eve is quite methodical about her revenge plan, and she follows the cult down to the snowy mountain town of Hallstatt. The Chancellor who killed her father holds a lot of influence here and has a lot of henchmen to protect him, and Eve finds out more about his hold on the town when she enters a restaurant and gets attacked. Eventually, the Chancellor gets to Eve and tells her that she is one of the organization's missing children. By now, the Chancellor's right-hand assassin Lena realizes that Eve is her long-lost sister, and she protects her from the men sent out to kill them both. The Chancellor has been portrayed as a ruthless killer who doesn't bat an eyelid when it comes to killing, and his narrative brings in another key character, Ella, played by Eve Macaro, who he wants to have among the ranks of the cult. There are some kick-ass action sequences that follow, and Eve and Lena endure a lethal grenade attack. Eve survives while Lena seems to be dead, and to make matters worse, the Chancellor calls the Roscaroma director to tell her that he will hold the Roscaroma responsible for the acts of Eve. The director tries to explain that Eve is acting out independently, but the Chancellor reminds her of a century-long understanding of non-interference between the two organizations that has been violated. This is when the director summons the services of John Wick to take down Eve so that she can be stopped before it ends up becoming an all-out gang war.
Rules.
And consequences.
What is John Wick's role in the movie? Is he friend or foe? If you look at it from Eve's perspective, John Wick's appearance in the narrative is more of a villain than an ally. But we all know that the Baba Yaga of the assassin world is just a man. He first arrives in his trademark black suit, presumably after his meeting with the Elder, because his ring finger is gone. His first encounter with Eve doesn't go too well for her, but he does try his best to land no lethal blows. He gives her time until midnight to complete her revenge, failing which he will be forced to take her out. What comes as a pleasant surprise for Eve is when she discovers that John is also going to be a valuable asset in the fight, as she takes on the Chancellor and his men in one bloody final encounter. Once again, the fight scenes take center stage, and I'm reminded of what really makes the John Wick series so appealing. Aside from the blend of Kung Fu, we have some memorable moments, such as the flamethrower duel that will be talked about for times to come. As Eve burns her opponents to death, John Wick lurks in the shadows, and he pulls the strings when necessary, clearly serving as a guardian angel for Eve.
I'm not leaving.
Your choice.
Ending explained. Does Eve get her revenge? How does the movie end on a cliffhanger? Finally, after an extensive bloodbath, Eve is able to stop the vehicle carrying the Chancellor and Elle, who's still captive. The cunning Chancellor does his best to manipulate Eve, even reminding her about the legacy of the cult and how it will continue to exist even if he's gone. But the fierce assassin has far too strong a revenge motive in her mind, and lands a decisive blow on his head. She takes Elle back to her father, and there's a beautiful sequence where she watches one of her former trainee friends perform a real ballet, showing the glimpse of a life free from all this violence. What seems like a happy and satisfying ending is suddenly interrupted by Eve's phone and many other phones, including that of Winston's going off. It turns out there's now a contract out for Eve, and the price is $5 million and rising. Surely the ending sounds familiar if you've watched the John Wick movies, and we know it's not just an easy happily ever after for Ana de Armas Eve Macaro. Is there a post-credits scene? Does this movie set up a sequel? Back in March 2023, when the movie was still in production, producer Erica Lee revealed that the studio has plans to go ahead with a sequel, where Ana de Armas would reprise her role. Now that I went into the theaters with this piece of information, I expected there would be a teasing post-credit scene somewhere to extend the arm of a sequel. But there are none, and you don't really need to sit through the long list of credits unless your friend Dave has worked as a part of the crew somehow. That being said, the climactic moments of the movie make it abundantly clear that the makers do have a sequel in mind. In fact, the ending almost reminds me of John Wick Chapter 2, where the movie ends with a handsome bounty announced for hunting down the protagonist. It's a gripping end to all the action, as John Wick has the clock ticking, and it's deja vu, as there's a price on the head of Eve Macaro, announced at the end of Ballerina. How she handles the dangerous situation remains to be seen, and my money is on the skilled assassin choosing fight instead of flight. Also, we all know by now that you can't really run from the high table or the cult in this instance. Given how the early signs of the movie have been promising, I expect this to do good business at the box office, which means that a sequel will most definitely be on the cards. Is Eve Macaro pitted as a John Wick replacement? I have to admit, there were some concerns about the nature of the movie, because many were speculating that it was an attempt to replace John Wick with a female version. However, watching the film made it quite clear that the boogeyman is still indispensable, even though he appears in a cameo role. Moreover, the character of Eve Macaro is not a mirror image of John Wick by any means. She's yet to grow into a flawless fighter and lacks the legendary invincibility that's associated with John. She fights and she falls, but she gets up to fight back harder. If anything, she does have John Wick's resilience, and she knows how to make use of her surroundings to take down stronger opponents, something that she learned in training when she was told that she needs to embrace the fact that she's a girl and must fight like one. Overall, this character played by Ana de Armas is naturally influenced by John Wick to some extent, but she does have her individuality, and leaves out enough space for John to function on his own accord. Of course, nobody in the right frame of mind can think of replacing Keanu Reeves. Certainly not on my approval. Does John Wick really fit into the story of the movie? Sometimes it's easy to be overwhelmed by a cameo as big as John Wick and ignore the basic loophole in the timeline bringing him in. Ballerina runs into the same problem because we see early in the movie that Eve witnesses John Wick seeking a safe passage out of New York when he's freshly excommunicado. Even though his request is reluctantly approved, it comes at a price and his ticket is torn, ripping his ties with the crime family officially. When the final part of the movie shows John Wick crossing paths with Eve, I did wonder why the director would call upon him to eliminate Eve after officially breaking ties. Also, knowing John Wick for all this time, wouldn't the director know that he does not go around killing innocent girls? The stakes are far too high as Rescoroma seeks to avoid an all-out war with the cult. It's almost like she wanted John to help Eve eliminate the Chancellor. But apart from that, the inclusion of John is almost a bit of a forced entry. Regardless, I'm one of those who derive joy from my man Keanu Reeves fighting in his black suit, so I'm definitely not going to hold this against the movie. What is the cult and who is in charge after the death of the Chancellor? We all know about the High Table and its authority in the underworld of the John Wick universe. This movie introduces the cult, which is a similar mysterious organization of assassins, and there's a chance that it's even older than the High Table. Their belief system and philosophies are not clearly defined, but I believe that they function on some strictly laid out ground rules. Free will is not of much importance here, and deserting the clan is not an option for those taken in. It operates from its headquarters in the remote base of Hallstatt, and the organization does deal in some shady activities, like the abduction of children and training them into assassins. The Chancellor's death does not mean that everything is over for the cult. Even though scores of valuable fighters fell in battle, the cult is still around, and the movie suggests that the organization is an ancient one, that functioned much before the Chancellor took up a leadership role. Clearly, the cult still has enough pull to put out a hit job on Eve for her act of aggression, and I expect a smooth transition of leadership, much like what we've seen from the High Table. Eve and all those who helped her are not going to be the target, which makes it likely that there will be more John Wick cameos if the Ballerina saga continues.
Welcome to the Continental.
Eve Macaro.
Marvelous verdict. Let us not be too skeptical. Any spin-off of the John Wick universe has big shoes to fill, but it would be unfair if we all start being too skeptical of whatever comes our way. Having watched the movie, I believe that it's a pretty decent effort, and as long as you don't compare it with the best of the John Wick franchise, you'll enjoy the action and entertainment. The characters are well developed, and even though the pacing is not as fast as you would like, it might change from the next film now that the backstory is complete. Ana de Armas is impressive as the protagonist, and maybe the studio can now be confident that she can hold her own even without any forced cameos. Lastly, the opportunity to see John, Winston, and Charon in a movie one last time is too big a prize to let go, and I strongly recommend checking this one out and judging it for yourself. Do let me know in the comments below what you think of this new release, and also share your views on the necessity of a John Wick cameo, and how you want to see Keanu Reeves' future in the franchise. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone!